A lot of folks have been asking me this, so I'm going to go ahead and tackle this question right off the bat. A lot of folks have been coming up to me and saying, "How you doing?" And I feel like in recent weeks, I have reached my lifetime limit on lying in answer to that question. I'm not okay. I haven't been okay for a long time. I'm getting a little better each day, but it's still very difficult. I always thought, because my wife was so sick for so long, that I would end up in this position maybe. I always used to joke with Tracy and say, "You're going to outlive all of us. Nothing can kill you." But, well, if only that was true. And I was looking forward to coming here, and I was also dreading it. And since I've been here, I've had emotional episodes out in the parking lot and at the hotel and various other places. And but I also have met some tremendous people here. I've reconnected with a lot of friends that I've known for a long time. I made some new friends, and even some that have offered me some real help and advice on how to cope with losing a spouse, and I appreciate that very, very much. I was very touched at being asked to come and speak at the lectureship this year. I'm one of those preachers that doesn't get asked to do much in the brotherhood, which is okay. I've often thought that I have had what people might think of as a forgettable career as a gospel preacher, because a lot of folks that hear me preach say, "Did a great job." And then they just kind of forget later on about whatever job it was that I did. It's funny you mentioned me speaking on Ruth and Esther at Polishing the Pulpit. I've spoken at PTP a handful of times, and each time I basically suggested my own topic. You know, it was like, "Hey, I wouldn't mind being able to speak about this," and so they would put me on the schedule for whatever. But whenever it seems like there's a particular topic that needs discussing, my name doesn't always come up in those kinds of discussions, and that's all right. That's one of the things as a preacher you have to learn to cope with and to be okay with. You come to a place like the Memphis School of Preaching and you graduate and you go out and you're ready to take on the whole world, but you have to understand that you probably are not going to be remembered as one of the greats. Your name whispered in the same breath as Robert Taylor or something like that, and that has to be okay. You're not, and this may come as a shock to many of you, you're not going to be rich as a gospel preacher. And that has to be okay. I've always prayed to the Lord that I'll have enough money to pay my bills. That's really all I want. That's all that I aspire to in life. I think some people thought I was a little crazy for thinking that way. I know my son, for a longest time, he was all about, "I want to grow up, I want to do a job that's going to make me the most money." And one of the things I tried to teach him was, listen, whatever you do something that makes you happy. Do something that is fulfilling. And there's nothing that is more fulfilling than preaching the gospel of Christ and ministering to those who are in need. I have to say, I really was glad to be assigned this topic. Who is wise? He who loves his neighbor and does not despise him. Because I have been the beneficiary of neighborly love and brotherly love for a long, long time. Going back to when I first decided to become a gospel preacher, there were all kinds of ways that folks back home in Ohio, where I came from, would do things for me and try to support me. I remember there was one lady at the church back home, and this was back in the days when if you collected enough proofs of purchase or receipts at the store or something like that, you could send them off, and then the company would send you a check for $2 or $3 or whatever. I've never really seen that done much anymore, but once upon a time that was a thing. And she used to do that and then send the checks to me. You know, just $2 here, $3 there, on a good day, maybe $5. But it was a little something that she was able to do to support me while I was in school and to encourage me and just to let me know that folks back home were thinking about me. And then, of course, with all the things that happened in the death of my wife, I could tell you, I could spend hours telling you about wonderful things that people have done for me and for my family. When Tracy fell and broke her leg at polishing the pulpit this past August and was admitted to the hospital there in Knoxville, people started walking up to me and just handing me money, which I, again, had a hard time processing all of that. I saw a brother in Christ named Wes Araby. I hope he doesn't mind me mentioning him. Wes was a student. I think he was in his first year when I was in my second year at the School of Preaching. I hadn't seen him for years. I hadn't seen him for at least 20 years. And he walked up to me at polishing the pulpit and he said, "Brother, I heard about Tracy. I'm so sorry that you guys are going through this." And he handed me $300. And that was his budget to buy books at PTP. He said, "But you know, I don't really need any books. You take this." I had another brother that preached in a congregation a couple counties away on Sunday afternoon of that first Sunday that I was there. He said, "I want you to meet me at this truck stop near the Sevierville exit." And he met me there and he gave me $500 that had come from that church's collection that morning. And it's just things like that. Churches that I hadn't had any contact with for years, people that I hadn't had much contact with at all, were just coming out of the woodwork, wanting to do things for me, wanting to help me and my family as we were going through this. And when Tracy was at her sickest, and I still thought that maybe she was going to get better, I remember thinking, I can't wait until I can tell her about all this amazing stuff that people have been doing. I never really got to talk to her about that, but I can talk to you about it, and it makes me feel better. And it's so good to look out and see some of you who were there for me and who were so helpful to me and my family. I love Mike Peters. He preached Tracy's funeral, and he did an incredible job and has been a great friend. Brother Rutherford and his wife made the 5-hour trip from Memphis to Madisonville to attend the funeral service, and that spoke to my heart. And I just want to say thank you to everybody out there who did so much to help me and to help Kevin and to help my mother-in-law Joanne and all the others who were affected by this loss. And I'd like to go on and talk more, but I need to get to the lecture that's in front of us. This business of loving your neighbor is something that is very much needed in the world today. You turn on the news and you hear about violence in various parts of the country, people doing things that are just senseless in their behavior toward their fellow man. Man's inhumanity to man is one of the most serious problems that we face in our society today. You could Just look at the news from only a couple of days ago at what happened in Nashville at that school. And it's a tale that is becoming all too commonplace. Maybe so much so that some people in our country have just kind of gone numb to that sort of news. I'll tell you this, I can't watch the national news very much at all without getting depressed. I can barely tolerate the local news without getting too depressed. But sometimes I just have to turn it off because it's relentless. All of the negativity, all of the evil that is taking place in the world around us. Well, you know, this lectureship that's being held here is predicated upon the fact that the wisdom of God is so vastly superior to the wisdom of men that it is not hyperbole to say there really is no comparing the two. I want to read to you first from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. It says, "For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and bring to nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world through wisdom did not know God, it pleased God through the foolishness of the message preached to save those who believe. For the Jews request a sign, and Greeks seek after wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified. To the Jews a stumbling block, and to the Greeks foolishness, but to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God, because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." You know, that last statement is hyperbole in a sense. It's not that God is ever foolish, but the idea is that even the weakest parts of the wisdom of God, they are far greater and far stronger than the strongest of man's wisdom and human philosophy. The same thing goes for the strength of God. It's not that God is ever too weak to do a particular thing. There is nothing that is beyond his capability because his strength is infinite. But even the weakest points of God's strength are vastly superior, way stronger than the strongest strength that humanity can bring to bear. There's another passage I want to read to you from Isaiah 55. You probably know where I'm going with this, verses 8 and 9. "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, nor are your ways my ways, says the Lord. For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." Again, there is no comparing the wisdom of God with the wisdom of men. Now, we human beings, we've accumulated a lot of knowledge, and we've built up a certain amount of wisdom. There are volumes and volumes of human philosophy that could fill up entire libraries, but it's still nothing in comparison with the wisdom of God that is revealed to humanity in just this one book. It is truly remarkable how prescient the Word of God is in every age. So, having said that, I want to say this. When the Lord answers the question, who is wise? Well, you can trust that that's going to be the correct answer. And we've seen the Lord answer that question time and again in all of the lectures that have been given throughout this lectureship. I don't know whose idea it was to have the lectureship on this topic, but I think that person deserves a pat on the back, because this is timely. This is something that the world needs. And in talking about this particular part of the discussion, well, as I said before, I just feel like I'm privileged to be able to stand before you and talk about it. He who loves his neighbor and does not despise him. There's your 2 points right there. That's where I'm going to divide this sermon. I want to talk first of all about he who loves his neighbor. For indeed, such an individual is wise. Fools have no love for their neighbors. Fools have no regard, no care whatsoever for what's going on in the lives of their fellow human beings. But a wise man, is aware of what's going on in his neighbor's life. He is engaged with his neighbor, and he is ready to help his neighbor whenever help is needed. People like the Good Samaritan are those that ought to come to mind when we think about those who love their neighbor. I don't have time to go to Luke 10, 25 through 37 and read all those passages to you and comment on them, but I'm sure that those of you who are in here today are at least somewhat familiar with the parable. You see, Jesus was asked a question by an expert in the law. And this expert in the law wasn't really seeking knowledge. He wasn't really trying to add to his own wisdom by asking the Lord the question that he asked him. He was hoping that maybe he might be able to get the Lord to say something controversial that he might be able to use against him. And when that didn't really pan out, well, he tried to save his bacon, in a manner of speaking, by asking, well, who is my neighbor? Who exactly is my neighbor? If I should love my neighbor as myself, how do I identify who my neighbor is? And in response, the Lord told the parable of the Good Samaritan. And it's about a man who is on a journey from Jerusalem to the city of Jericho. And as he is on his way, well, he falls in among a group of thieves. That road, like a lot of roads in the ancient world, was known to be somewhat treacherous. And there would be robbers and highwaymen at various points along the way that would beset, especially lone travelers. That's why so many people who traveled in the ancient world would travel together. And really, that's a problem that humanity had faced for a very long time. You look at the early history of the United States of America. As people were making their way westward, they weren't doing it one at a time. They were doing it in groups because there was safety traveling in numbers. Even navigating the rivers of the United States was once a very treacherous business. Did you know that there were river pirates at one time that would be looking for merchants and settlers and others trying to transport valuable cargo up and down the Ohio River Valley and the Mississippi River Valley and other valleys such as those? They would stake out places where they could conceal themselves and then spring a trap upon those who were passing by. Every once in a while, I'll go up to southern Illinois. In fact, for about the last 5 years, every January, I've been invited to come and speak at the Hardin County Church of Christ. Hardin County Church of Christ is located fairly close to a city with a very interesting name. It's called Cave-in Rock, Illinois. And it gets its name from a rock formation right there along the Ohio River. And it is right there along the river. In order to get to that church, if I want to go the fastest, shortest way, what I have to do is take a ferry across the Ohio River, which can be kind of fun and kind of disconcerting when the weather's bad. But I didn't really think much about that place, and then I was watching some old episodes of the Daniel Boone TV show. And Cave-In Rock is a name that you would hear a lot as they were talking about the Ohio River and as they were talking about the dangers of traveling the river. The pirates. Evidently, Cave-In Rock was a pirate's lair at one time in the history of the United States, and now it's just this sleepy little town. Well, this is the situation that was faced by the man who fell among thieves. He was beaten, he was robbed, he was left there half dead, the Bible says. And then along came a priest, and then along came a Levite, and they offered no help at all. Jesus indicated that they were aware of that man. They were aware that he was in need. And the implication is that they could have stopped, they could have helped out, but they didn't. Who helped? The Good Samaritan. This Samaritan came along, saw the man that had fallen among thieves, and had compassion on him. He was able to put himself in that man's place and think, if that was me, I'd want somebody to help me. And so he took time out of his schedule. He stopped. He helped as best he could. And then he took the man to an inn and went above and beyond what one might consider to be the call of human decency. He got the man a room, he paid for the man's lodgings, and he indicated to the innkeeper, if you incur any other expenses while nursing him back to health, I'll take care of that when I come back later. That to me is such an amazing gesture of kindness and human decency. It would have been something remarkable in the ancient world, and it would be just as remarkable today to see that kind of generosity. And, well, as I said before, I've been on the receiving end of that kind of generosity, even just fairly recently in my own life story. It's something that makes an impression on you. And it's something that you know you'll never be able to pay the person back for what they did for you. So you think, well, maybe I can pay it forward one day. Maybe I can help somebody one day. In doing that, well, that's how you show your love for your neighbor. Because as Jesus pointed out in the parable, the neighbor was the one who was in need. And it didn't matter who he was. It didn't matter where he came from. It didn't matter what language he spoke. It didn't matter what color his skin was. It didn't matter what his circumstances were at all. He was a human being who was in need. That's who our neighbors are. Not just those who look like us, not just those who talk like us, not just those who think like us, but everybody. Everybody. Those who are in need and we can help them, we have a responsibility. We have an obligation. We owe it to them and we owe it to the Lord. He who loves his neighbor is like the Good Samaritan. He who loves his neighbor is a lover of God, according to Matthew 22:34-39, where Jesus was asked, which of all the commandments of the law is the greatest? And without hesitation, he answered, thou shalt love the Lord thy God. Love God, that's the number one commandment. And then he gave him a bonus. I'll tell you what number 2 is. He said, the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. The idea is that if you love God, then you should also love your fellow human beings, who, after all, are made in the image of God. In 1 John, John made the argument that if you say that you love God, but you hate your brother who is made in God's image, you can't really say that you love God. You might say it, but your actions betray the reality of the status of your heart. You know, Jesus taught his disciples that as we go out into the world and we offer assistance and help to those who need it, it is as though we are rendering aid to the Lord himself. And if we see someone who is in need and we fail to help them, it is as if we have failed to help the Lord himself. And don't think for a minute that God doesn't notice that. How many times have you seen somebody stuck on the side of the highway and thought to yourself, well, I'd like to stop and help, but I'm running late. Got to get to work, got to get to that appointment, got to make it to wherever it is that I'm going. Why don't we stop and help people? A lot of times people will say, I'm scared. I'm afraid that they might pull out a gun and try to shoot me. Well, what do you suppose the chances of that happening really are, as opposed to what is much more likely, that they're just somebody that needs help? I can remember one Sunday afternoon when my son Kevin was still little. I had just preached a sermon on this subject, and we were on our way to go to Cracker Barrel and get something to eat. And then right along on the side of the highway, there's a van with a flat tire and about 4 or 5 women trying to change it. And, I thought, well, I certainly can't drive past this, especially after just preaching the sermon that I preached. So I stopped and I helped them get their tire changed. Come to find out that they were a group of nuns on their way to a conference somewhere else in western Kentucky. And I just always chuckled to myself about, well, I helped a group of nuns as they went on their way. But you know what? Nuns are our neighbors too. Anyone who is in need, and we have a way to help them with that need, that's our neighbor. That's who Jesus wants us to help. Sometimes people are like, well, Lord, I want to help, but I don't know who to help. Just look around you. There are people that need help all around you. And there are many different ways that you can help somebody. Getting back to a personal story, when I was stranded in Knoxville for a month, Tracy was in the hospital there for 42 days. I went and worshiped every Sunday with the brethren at the Carnes Church of Christ, an excellent congregation, one that I would recommend heartily to anyone. Their preacher, Steve Higginbotham, his father, Frank Higginbotham, was one of my first influences as a gospel preacher. He was a man who preached for the Virginia Avenue Church of Christ in Chester, West Virginia, seemingly all his life. A lot of people had the idea that he was just there when they built the place, and he just continued to preach there for ages and ages. I think he had a career of somewhere between 40 and 50 years in that one location. And I thought, yeah, that's what I want. I want to find a place where I can set down roots. I don't want to be one of those guys that moves every 4 or 5 years just to mix it up. I want to find a place where I can put down roots and be part of a community. And I honestly thought that place would end up being in Ohio, where I grew up. I got a chance to preach in Ohio. After 3 years, they asked me to leave. And I didn't know, I was low at that point. But I ended up going to Madisonville. And I've been there for 27 years, going on 28 years now. Never imagined that would be the place where I'd put down roots, but nonetheless, That's where it was. But anyway, getting back to the story I was starting to tell you about to begin with, Brother Higginbotham and his wife had me stay with them in their house. The first day that I went there, they said, "Are you in a hotel?" I said, "Yes." "Well, not anymore. You're going to come stay with us." And they were very good to me, helped me in such a way, I could never repay them. And while I was there, I got to know some of the students at the Southeast Institute of Bible Studies, some wonderful, wonderful guys. And I remember one Sunday evening, I would come in, I would sit in the same place, and I'd be there by myself. I'd sit there and worship, thinking about what was going on at the hospital, thinking about what may or may not happen in the future. And I remember one Sunday, all the first year students would sit together in a section that was just to the right of me. And out of the corner of my eye, I saw them kind of talk to each other, and then they all got up, and they all came over and sat down by me. And that was wonderful. You know, sometimes you can help somebody just by physically being present. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to do anything spectacular. Just be there for them and show them some solidarity. Like a lover of God and like a faithful Christian. Galatians 6 and verse 10, "As we have therefore opportunity, let us do good unto all men, but especially those who are of the household of faith." Indeed, whenever the opportunity presents itself, that is a chance for us to shine. That is a chance for the light of the Lord to shine in us. And we should never pass up a chance like that. Now, of course, I need to come to the second point in the lesson, and that is, who is wise? He who loves his neighbor and does not despise him. What's it mean to despise somebody? I think in the chapter I wrote for the book, I've got the dictionary definition of the word, and I've looked at the Hebrew and the Greek, and my understanding of it is that it's a word that refers to the idea of hatred and resentment and ill will that you might feel for somebody, and there's not really even a reason for it. You know, I just don't like this guy. Why don't you like him? I don't know. I don't like the way he looks. I don't like the way he wears his hat. I don't like the way he chooses food. Doesn't really matter. There are all kinds of instances in which people develop prejudices against others. And sometimes it's a mystery as to why it even happens. Some of you may have experienced this. I can remember when I first moved to Madisonville, there was one man in the business meeting who was my biggest cheerleader. He started out, he argued for them to hire me. And when I started out, "Hey, brother, anything you need, I'll help you out with. Any kind of help you want, I'll be there for you." He was a big supporter, but after 6 months, he flipped. And all of a sudden, he was talking like, "Hey, we need to get rid of this guy and get somebody better." And I couldn't understand why. What changed? What was different about me? What was different about him? I don't know. The interesting thing about it was that he never could get enough support in the business meeting for them to get rid of me, so he left. And then I saw him again a few years later, and he acted like he was so glad to see me. He introduced me to a friend and said, "This is one of my favorite preachers." Again, I was like, what changed? What happened? Some things are just a mystery. But sometimes people come up with prejudices that are based on surface level, superficial things. And that's not how we're supposed to judge people, is it? In John 7:24, Jesus said, "Judge not according to appearance, but judge righteous judgment." There are those who say, "Well, we shouldn't judge at all. Oh, you shouldn't judge people at all," which is ridiculous. We make judgments about people and things and places all the time. The important thing is that we make judgments that are based on facts, that are based on how things really are, rather than how things seem on the surface. Never judge a book by its cover is an old saying for a reason, because there's an awful lot of truth in it. One who does not despise his neighbor is someone who practices righteous judgment. I mean, how can I know that I don't like my neighbor if I don't even know my neighbor? If I never even give my neighbor a chance to get to know me? Many times we do make snap judgments. Many times we do, say things like his name eludes me, but one of the early disciples who was informed that Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah. He said, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Nathaniel. He made a snap judgment, but then he found out better. He got the facts and ended up becoming a great follower of the Lord because he judged righteously. There are things that Christians are supposed to hate. Don't make any mistake about that. Psalm 119, 104 says, through thy precepts I get understanding. Therefore I hate every false way. Right? Christians are supposed to hate sin. We should feel very strongly about sin. Sometimes problems come to us and we give in to temptation because we don't feel as strongly about sin maybe as we ought to. And we don't try to stave it off and keep it out of our lives as we should. We should be trying to put as much distance between us and sin as we possibly can and hate those ways that lead to falsehood and loss. One who loves his neighbor and does not despise him loves lost souls. You hear the slogan, hate the sin, love the sinner. There's not really a verse in the Bible that says that in so many words, but the idea is very much a biblical idea. Yes, hate sin, hate every false way, Psalm 119, 104, but love those who are lost and try to make a difference in their lives. In Mark 8, 36 and 37, we learn about the value of every lost soul. How that every lost soul is worth more than all the treasure in the world. And if we really believe that, then what are we going to do about it? Are we going to make the effort to reach out to those who are lost and dying in their sins? Are we going to go out of our way to try and make a difference in the lives of those who are hurting all around us? There's an interesting quote that I read recently from an outspoken atheist and critic of Christianity. You've heard of the magic duo Penn and Teller. Penn Jillette is the guy that does all the talking. Teller is the guy that does none of the talking. Together they perform some pretty amazing sleight of hand, feats of magic and illusion. Well, evidently Teller, when he does speak, is quite the outspoken atheist. He speaks against Christianity and against belief in the Bible. But he made a very interesting point in a letter that he wrote to a friend that eventually found its way to publication, where he writes about how ironic it is and what a shame it is and what great hypocrisy there is in Christians who don't try to convert other people. Christians who don't talk to their neighbors and friends and family members about the Lord. And he poses the question, boy, how much must they hate those people that they don't want to share with them what's supposed to be the best thing in their lives? Now, he was trying to make a point about hypocrisy, but the point that he made is valid and should hit every one of us right between the eyes. Is there anyone in your life who is not a Christian that you haven't yet talked to and tried to convert? And if that's the case, well, why? If you're waiting for the right time, let me assure you that the right time may never come. The Lord may come first. So while there is time and while there is opportunity, make the most of it. Love those people enough to mention the Lord to them. Who is wise? He that loves his neighbor and does not despise him. The text that was put together with this topic is Proverbs 11:12. He who is devoid of wisdom despises his neighbor, but a man of understanding holds his peace. The idea of holding your peace is the idea of just not saying anything. When I was a first-year student at the Memphis School of Preaching, it was the last year that Brother John Renshaw taught classes. And I remember he always used to be very fond of the saying, and he would quote it to us many times, "It is better to keep your mouth closed and be thought a fool than to open it and remove all doubt." And indeed, the Bible teaches us in the Proverbs and in so many other places that silence is often the better part of discretion. Maybe your neighbor, and could be your next door neighbor, maybe your neighbor is annoying. Maybe they play their music too loud. Maybe they don't keep their grass cut the way you think they should. Maybe they let weeds grow in their flower garden. Maybe their chickens keep getting loose and coming over into your yard. I don't know. I don't know your neighbors. But don't let those things make you despise your neighbor. Love your neighbor. Invite them to come to church with you. If you want them to change, well then encourage them to change. Try and do something about that. Jesus talked about praying for those that despitefully use and persecute us. Indeed, we should. We should be praying for them to have a change of heart. We should be praying for them to change their lives for the better. And we should be doing what needs to be done to encourage that to happen. I hope that as we leave here, we all will be resolved to love our neighbors and not to despise anyone, but to have kindness, goodness, and generosity in our hearts at all times. Thank you all again for being here. I want to thank the school for this opportunity to speak, and I want to thank you all for allowing me to have a chance to get up here and talk to you a little bit about what I've been going through. Please continue to pray for me, and I'll be praying for all of you. Thank you.
Mike, would you lead us in a prayer here in just a moment? Russell, I appreciate that very much. I want to make a couple of comments about something you said at the beginning. The reality is, and we teach this to our students here, preachers go out and do the work of God to glorify God and save souls, and should never do it to seek any kind of glory from men. And so it doesn't make you more important if you're on more gospel meetings or lectureships than some other preacher. You're not more important if you're a faculty member at a school of preaching. That really ultimately means nothing if you're not doing it to glorify God and doing it in His way. God, I have no doubt, looks out and sees many, many preachers that are not very well known, who are working very, very hard for Him, that He is very, very pleased with. And sometimes it may be the case, and I'm not pointing any fingers, but sometimes it may be the case that those who are not particularly well known are actually doing more to serve the Lord than those who are. So that could happen. So those kind of things are really not important. What's important is we do God's work and we glorify Him. And I think many of you know that I met your wife while she was in college, and at that time she was dating you, and you were at the Memphis School of Preaching. And so we have known you all a long, long time. And I want to say that I admire your courage. I don't even know how you get up and preach in a situation like that, but thank you very much. So, Mike, if you would come and lead us in a word of prayer, and then we'll be dismissed.
Bow with me. Our most gracious and righteous Heavenly Father, we're so thankful for this week of edification and encouragement. We're so thankful for the school that and the work that she continues to do and training men to go out and seeking the lost and encouraging the brotherhood. And Father, we're so thankful for the message we've just heard. Please